A rainy night, an impatient millionaire, a brutal impact, and a pregnant woman left for dead in the gutter. Years later, she's reborn as the executive he trusts most, never imagining she's the one who holds the key to his survival and his downfall. The rain fell hard on the streets of New York City, turning Park Avenue into a river of blurred lights and impatient horns. It was one of those nights when the sky seemed to collapse on the city, as if trying to wash away all the sins caked on the asphalt. Sarah Jennings hurried across the crosswalk, shielding her 7-month pregnant belly with a thin coat that barely warmed her. Her feet ached inside her worn-out shoes, and she felt every cold drop that ran down her face, mingling with the tears she'd been trying to hold back since leaving the doctor's office earlier. The baby was fine, the doctor had said with a reassuring smile, a healthy boy who kicked with strong, promising thumps. But Sarah couldn't feel complete joy, not when she looked at the hospital bill that grew with every visit, not when she thought of the tiny apartment in Queens she shared with her sick mother, not when she remembered that the baby's father had vanished the moment he heard she was pregnant. Still, she caressed her belly tenderly whenever the little one moved, whispering promises of a better future, of a life full of love, even if money was scarce. The walk signal was on. Sarah looked both ways out of habit, something her mother had insisted on since she was a child. That's when she saw the silver sedan speeding toward her, its tires kicking up curtains of water. For a split second, her eyes met the driver's, a middle-aged man, impeccable suit, his face tense with the urgency of someone late for something too important to care about traffic laws. He wasn't looking ahead. He was glancing at his phone. Sarah tried to run, but her heavy, tired body didn't respond in time. The impact threw her against the curb with a force that knocked all the air from her lungs. She felt a sharp pain slice through her abdomen, a damp warmth spreading down her legs. The world spun in slow motion as she tried to get up, reaching a hand toward the car that had stopped a few yards ahead. She saw the door open, saw the man get out, not to help her, but to inspect the dented bumper of his luxury car. "Please, my baby," were the words she tried to scream, but they came out as a mere whisper, muffled by the storm and the pain. The man glanced at her over his shoulder. His cold, calculating eyes sized up the situation like someone assessing a risky investment. Sarah saw him check his surroundings, noting the deserted street, the broken city security cameras on that forgotten corner. She saw him make his decision, and she saw him get back in the car and speed away, disappearing into the curtain of rain as if she were just an inconvenient obstacle. Sarah didn't know how long she lay there, crumpled in the gutter, feeling the cold water mix with the blood seeping from her wounds. The city lights blinked above her, indifferent, as she fought to keep her eyes open, to stay conscious, to protect with trembling hands the belly that now ached in a way she knew was terrible. It was a homeless man who finally found her, a kind-eyed old man named John who dropped his shopping cart full of cans to kneel beside her and hold her hand while he yelled for help. The ambulance took 20 minutes to arrive, 20 minutes that felt like 20 hours, 20 days, 20 years. As the paramedics lifted her onto the stretcher, Sarah managed to whisper the name she had chosen for her son. Gabriel. My little angel. Gabriel. Then everything went dark. When she woke up, it was no longer raining. The sterile white light of Bellevue Hospital blinded her for a moment. Sarah tried to move and felt that her body was broken in ways she never imagined possible. Tubes ran into her arms, monitors beeped around her, and there was a crushing weight on her chest that had nothing to do with the bandages. She brought a hand to her belly and felt only emptiness, a slack, devastatingly flat void. No, 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 no. The word echoed in her mind as she tried to sit up, pulling at the wires, setting off alarms. Nurses rushed into the room, holding her down with firm gentleness, whispering words of comfort she couldn't process. "Where's my son? Where's Gabriel?" Sarah screamed, or thought she screamed, but her voice came out raw and broken. A doctor with tired eyes approached, holding her hand with a compassion that was almost worse than indifference. "Mrs. Jennings, I'm so sorry," the doctor began, and Sarah already knew. She knew before the words were spoken. She knew from the silence where a baby's cry should have been. The trauma from the accident was too severe. We did everything we could, but we couldn't save your baby. He was gone before we even got to the hospital. The physical pain was nothing compared to the emptiness that settled inside her. Sarah felt as if someone had ripped out her still-beating heart, leaving only a black hole where hope and love and dreams had once been. She didn't cry. She couldn't. It was as if all the tears in the world weren't enough to express the magnitude of the loss, so her body simply gave up trying. "There's more," the doctor continued, and Sarah wanted to scream for her to stop, because how could there be more? How could it get worse? The internal injuries were extensive. We had to perform emergency surgery. Your uterus was irreparably damaged. We had to perform a hysterectomy. I'm so sorry, but you won't be able to have any more children. The room began to spin. Sarah closed her eyes, wishing that when she opened them, she'd be back in that crosswalk, that she could rewind those few seconds, run faster, choose a different way home. But when she opened her eyes, she was still in that hospital bed, still broken inside and out, still absolutely and irrevocably alone. In the days that followed, the investigators came. 2 tired detectives with notepads and questions that Sarah answered in a state of shock. "Did you see the license plate?" "No, it was raining too hard." "Can you describe the driver?" "A man, dark suit, face." She closed her eyes, trying to burn every detail into her memory. Angular face, graying at the temples, light, cold eyes. He got out of the car, looked at me, and left. He just left. The detectives exchanged glances. No plate, no working cameras in the area, no witnesses, besides a homeless man whose testimony would be questionable in court. The case was classified as a hit and run, filed away in the cold case pile that was accumulating at the precinct. "We'll keep investigating," one of them promised without conviction. But Sarah saw the truth in his eyes. To them, she was just another number, another statistic in New York's urban violence. But to her, it was everything. It was Gabriel. It was her ability to be a mother. It was the future she had planned while sewing baby clothes at night. It was every dream she had cherished while counting the days until she could hold her son in her arms. And someone had taken it all from her and just driven away, as if she were nothing, as if her son were nothing, as if their lives were just an inconvenience on a rainy night. When she was discharged from the hospital 3 weeks later, Sarah Jennings was no longer the same person. The kind, dreamy young woman who believed in the goodness of people had been left in that gutter along with her blood. The woman who limped out of the hospital with scars that would never fully fade was something else. She was determination hardened into flesh and bone. She was pain forged into purpose. Her mother, Connie, tried to console her. "My daughter, you have to move on, leave it. In God's hands." But Sarah didn't want to leave it in God's hands. God wasn't there when the car hit her. God didn't stop the driver from fleeing. If there was any justice to be had, it would have to come from her own hands. During the months of physical recovery, Sarah became obsessed. She had kept one detail she hadn't mentioned to the investigators, a card up her sleeve she held just for herself. The car. It wasn't just any silver sedan. It was a specific, imported model with custom details she had seared into her memory. A small, old star-shaped dent on the rear bumper, a discreet sticker for an exclusive golf club, and that exact shade of silver that seemed to shine even in the rain. She started researching. She spent hours at the public library, using the free computers to scour luxury vehicle registries, membership lists of exclusive clubs, news about New York's businessmen and executives. She created folder after folder of information, connecting dots like an obsessed detective. She spent what little money she had on copies of public records, on subway fares to wealthy neighborhoods, where she would spend hours watching cars in the garages of mansions. It was on one of those afternoons, 6 months after the accident, that she saw it. The car was parked in front of a luxury office building in Midtown. The same silver color, the same star-shaped dent, the same sticker. Sarah's heart pounded. She hid behind a column, her hands shaking, and waited. She waited for 2 hours until the building's glass doors opened and he appeared. Richard Sterling. She would find out his name later, reading the plaque on his reserved parking space. CEO of Sterling Enterprises, one of the largest real estate conglomerates in the country. Billionaire, influential, untouchable, the man who had run down a pregnant woman and fled was one of New York's most respected businessmen, his face on the covers of business magazines, with philanthropy awards and speeches on social responsibility. Sarah felt bile rise in her throat. There he was, alive, prosperous, smiling at the driver who opened the car door for him, while Gabriel would never get the chance to give his first smile. The injustice was so blatant that for a moment she thought about running up to him, screaming the truth for all the passing executives to hear, making a scene. But she stopped herself, because making a scene wasn't enough, not when he had the money for lawyers who would turn her word against his into nothing. At that moment, watching Richard Sterling get into his car and drive off without a second glance, Sarah made a decision. She wasn't going to the police with this information. She wasn't going to the press. She wasn't going to seek justice through the official channels that had already failed her. No. She was going to do something much deeper, much more devastating. She would destroy his empire from the inside out. She would take from him everything he loved, everything he had built, everything that gave meaning to his empty existence. And she would do it with such patience and precision that when he finally realized it, it would be too late. But to do that, she would have to transform herself. She would have to stop being Sarah Jennings, the cleaning lady from Queens. She would have to become someone who could get close to his world, earn his trust, become indispensable. She would need education, polish, credentials, and above all, she would need time and unwavering determination. Sarah went home that night with a plan beginning to form in her mind. She sold everything of value she had, took out loans, and enrolled in night classes for business administration while working 3 shifts during the day. She slept 4 hours a night, studied on the subway, memorized business concepts while cleaning offices. Every sacrifice, every lost hour of sleep, every moment of exhaustion was fuel for her revenge. 3 years passed in a blur of fierce determination. Sarah graduated at the top of her class, landed internships at smaller companies, and built an impressive resume. She changed. Her look, straightened her hair, bought clothes at high-end consignment shops, and learned to speak with the polished diction of an executive. She completely reinvented herself, erasing any trace of the vulnerable woman she had been. And then, when she was ready, when she had transformed into a flawless and ambitious professional, she aimed for her target. She secured a junior position at Sterling Enterprises through a rigorous selection process where her competence spoke louder than any connection. The day she received the confirmation of her hiring, Sarah allowed herself a cold smile. She was in. The first day for Sarah at Sterling Enterprises was meticulously planned. She arrived 15 minutes early, wearing a discreet but well-tailored grey suit, her hair in a flawless bun, and light makeup that hid her sleepless nights. As she walked through the marble lobby of the 32nd floor, where the executive offices were located, her heart pounded, but her face remained serene and professional. No one could suspect she was anything more than another ambitious young woman seeking a career. In the first few months, Sarah worked with a dedication that impressed even the most workaholic colleagues. She arrived early, left late, volunteered for the most difficult projects, and never complained about overtime. She studied every report, every spreadsheet, every detail of the conglomerate's operations, as if she were memorizing a treasure map. And in a way, that's exactly what she was doing. Every piece of information was a part of the puzzle, every revealed connection a potential weak point. Richard Sterling was a distant presence in those early days. Sarah saw him occasionally in the hallways, always surrounded by assistants and sycophants, always on the phone closing multi-million-dollar deals. She made sure never to cross his path directly, never to draw attention. Not yet. She watched from afar, studying his patterns, his moods, the way he treated his subordinates with a mix of superficial charm and veiled cruelty. He was older now. 4 years had passed since that rainy night. He had more grey hairs, deeper wrinkles around his eyes, but he still carried that arrogant posture of someone who believed he was above consequences. Sarah saw him humiliate assistants for minor mistakes, fire people without batting an eye, and make decisions that affected hundreds of families thinking only of the numbers on the balance sheet. And every time she witnessed his casual cruelty, she discreetly touched the small scar on her abdomen, reminding herself why she was there. The opportunity came unexpectedly. Richard's senior executive assistant, an efficient woman named Patricia, who orchestrated the CEO's entire schedule, had a nervous breakdown after years of grueling work. She was hospitalized with severe burnout syndrome, and the doctors were clear she wouldn't be back anytime soon. The company panicked. Richard Sterling was notoriously difficult, and Patricia was the only one who could anticipate his whims and keep the chaos organized. Sarah saw her chance and acted with surgical precision. She had cultivated a strategic friendship with Teresa, the director of human resources, during coffee breaks. When Teresa desperately mentioned the urgent need to temporarily replace Patricia, Sarah offered herself with calculated humility. "I know I'm junior, but I'm familiar with all the ongoing projects. I've worked directly with Patricia on several occasions, and well, I don't have a social life to get in the way of overtime." Teresa looked at her with equal parts gratitude and desperation. 2 days later, Sarah was sitting in the office next to Richard Sterling's, at a desk that commanded access to the most powerful man in the company. Her heart was beating like a war drum, but her hands were steady as she organized his schedule for the first time. Soon, very soon, she would be so close to the man who had destroyed her life that she could smell his expensive cologne. The first direct contact was impersonal. Richard stormed into the office like a hurricane, barking orders without even looking at her. "Cancel my 3 o'clock, reschedule for tomorrow, and get me a coffee, double espresso, no sugar." Sarah complied with silent efficiency, placing the cup on his desk exactly 3 minutes later. He took it without a thank you, without even looking up from the papers he was reading. To him, she was invisible, just another cog in the machine that served his purposes. Perfect. Sarah wanted to be invisible. She wanted him to get used to her presence like one gets used to furniture. And then gradually she began to make herself indispensable. She memorized his preferences, anticipated his needs before he verbalized them. When he arrived stressed from a difficult meeting, the coffee was already waiting. When he needed a document, she had already pulled it. When his mood soured, she knew when to speak and when to remain silent. 3 months passed. Patricia tried to return but had a relapse. Sarah's position became permanent. She now had access to absolutely everything in Richard Sterling's life, from his appointment schedule to his corporate email passwords. She organized his trips, knew his contacts, saw his bank statements when they arrived. It was a position of absurd trust, and he never suspected a thing. One afternoon, 6 months after becoming his executive assistant, Sarah was alone in the office reviewing contracts when she found something interesting. An old folder, misfiled, containing records of a real estate development from 15 years ago in a low-income neighborhood. There were glaring irregularities, falsified permits, documented bribes, families forcibly removed. The kind of thing that could destroy Richard's reputation if it fell into the wrong hands. She carefully photographed each page, saving everything on an encrypted flash drive she kept hidden in the lining of her purse. She wasn't going to use it yet. It was important to accumulate ammunition, to build a complete arsenal before firing the first shot. But knowing it was there, that proof that he was exactly the monster she always knew he was, brought a dark satisfaction. It was around this time that Sarah began to notice changes in Richard. He was more irritable, more tired. He declined lunches, which was unusual for someone who lived on business meetings over expensive wines. He took ibuprofen frequently, massaging his temples during video conferences. When she discreetly mentioned that he seemed to need rest, he reacted aggressively. "Manage the schedule and leave my health to the doctors." But she was his assistant, she knew his doctors. And when she saw an appointment scheduled with a nephrologist on his calendar, her instincts kicked in. Nephrologist. Kidney specialist. Why would Richard Sterling need a kidney specialist? Curiosity led her to do something risky. Using his credentials, she accessed the company's executive health plan system. It was too easy. He used the same password for everything, the company name followed by predictable numbers. There in the medical records, she found the time bomb that would change the entire game. Richard Sterling was sick, very sick. The tests showed a progressive kidney condition, a rare disease that was irreversibly destroying his kidneys. The medical reports were grim. Without a transplant, he had a few years to live, maybe months if the degeneration accelerated, and his blood type, combined with specific genetic markers, made finding a compatible donor an almost impossible task. Sarah stood before the computer for long minutes, processing the information. The universe was more ironic than she could have ever imagined. The man who had fled after nearly killing her was now facing his own mortality. But unlike her, who never had a choice, he had money, resources, the possibility to fight. The question was, for how long? She closed the files, cleared the access history, and went back to work as if nothing had happened. But her mind was racing, recalculating, replanning. This changed everything. She didn't need to slowly destroy his empire. Time would do that for her. The real revenge would be something else. It would be watching him lose everything that mattered as life drained from him. It would be denying him any mercy, just as he had denied her that night. In the following weeks, Richard visibly worsened. His skin took on a yellowish hue, the dark circles under his eyes deepened, and he lost weight. Meetings began to be cancelled more frequently. Sarah saw him taking medication secretly, swallowing pills, with water between important calls. He tried to maintain the facade, but it was impossible to completely hide the decline. It was during this period that something unexpected happened. One night, working late as usual, Sarah was alone in the office when Richard came out of his room. He was exhausted, swaying slightly. She stood up instinctively, ready to help professionally, when he simply collapsed. His legs gave out, and he fell to his knees on the marble floor. For a split second, Sarah froze. There he was, vulnerable, weak, fallen at her feet just as she had been in that gutter. It would be so easy to leave him there, to call for an ambulance too late, to claim she hadn't noticed. But something in her, perhaps the last remnant of the old Sarah, made her act. She ran to him, held him by the shoulders, and helped him sit up against the wall. "It's okay, Mr. Sterling, I'll call an ambulance," she said, reaching for her phone. But his hand gripped her wrist with surprising strength for someone so frail. No ambulance, no scandal. He was breathing heavily, his pride still present even in his weakness. "Help. Me back to my office. I just need to rest." Sarah hesitated but complied. She helped him up, supporting part of his weight as she guided him back to the leather sofa in his office. She brought him water, adjusted the cushions, and for the first time since she started working for him, Richard Sterling really looked at her, really saw the woman who was there, taking care of him when she could have run, when she could have let nature take its course. "What's your name again?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Sarah Jennings, sir." "How long have you been working for me?" 8 months. He closed his eyes, leaning his head back on the sofa. "That's longer than most last. Why haven't you left yet? Everyone leaves. Or goes crazy." Sarah could have told him the truth right then. She could have revealed who she really was, what he had done, how every day working for him was a self-imposed torture. But it wasn't time. So she said something that was partially true. "Because I know what it's like to have no choices, Mr. Sterling. I know what it's like to have to survive even when everything inside." He wants to give up. Something flickered in his eyes, a reluctant understanding, almost a recognition of shared humanity. Then he waved his hand, dismissing her. "You can go home. And Sarah, thank you." She nodded and left, but that thank you echoed in her mind the entire subway ride back to her apartment. It was the first time he had treated her like a person, not a tool, and that, in some disturbing way, made everything more complicated. In the months that followed, the relationship between them subtly changed. Richard was still harsh, still demanding, but there was a difference. He asked for her opinion on important decisions, trusted her judgment, sometimes even talked about things that weren't strictly professional. And the sicker he got, the more dependent on her he became. Sarah took advantage of this dependency with calculated coldness. She took on more responsibilities, became the person who controlled access to him, who managed his health crises, who knew exactly what medications he took and when. She became so indispensable that the entire company began to rely on her to function. Because without her, Richard would fall apart, and without Richard, the empire would fall apart. And then came the day that would change everything. A typical Tuesday in October during a board meeting. Richard was presenting quarterly results when he simply stopped mid-sentence. His face went pale, his hands trembled as he held the presentation remote. From her seat at the back of the room, Sarah saw him try to continue, saw his voice fail, saw his knees buckle. This time, there was no hiding it. The ambulance was called, the directors panicked, and Richard Sterling was rushed to Mount Sinai Hospital. Sarah went with them because someone had to have the medical contacts, the insurance, numbers, the information no one else had access to. On the way, holding the briefcase with his documents, she looked at the unconscious man on the gurney and thought, now the final act begins. The hospital became Sarah's new office. While Richard Sterling underwent battery after battery of tests, she managed his empire from a waiting room, laptop balanced on her knees, corporate cell phone ringing incessantly. The doctors were clear. The situation was critical. Both his kidneys were failing rapidly, and he would need immediate dialysis while they waited for a miracle on the transplant list. A miracle that, given the rarity of his blood type and genetic markers, would likely never come. 3 days after being admitted, Richard regained enough consciousness for lucid conversations. Sarah was by his side when the nephrologist explained the gravity of the situation with that professional compassion doctors develop for delivering bad news. Mr. Sterling, without a compatible transplant, we're talking about months, maybe a year with luck and aggressive treatment. We need to start searching for donors immediately. Richard listened in silence, his face a mask of control that poorly hid the terror in his eyes. When the doctor left, he looked at Sarah, the only other person in the room. Use all the company's resources. Hire the best specialists in the world. Offer whatever it takes. There has to be someone compatible somewhere. His voice held a desperation she had never heard before. Sarah nodded, taking notes on her tablet. But as she wrote, her mind was elsewhere. She knew something no one else did yet. Something she had discovered 2 weeks earlier during a mandatory routine checkup for all the company's high-level executives. Corporate policy required complete annual health screenings, including detailed blood typing and genetic profiles for the premium health plan. When Sarah was promoted to executive assistant, she was automatically included in this category. The results had arrived in a sealed envelope for the HR department. Sarah, responsible for organizing all of Richard's documentation, had access to the medical files. And one afternoon, when she needed to check something in his records, she also saw her own file digitized in the system. Curiosity made her open it. And there, in cold scientific medical codes, was the truth that made her feel as if the universe itself had a cruel sense of humor. She was a match. A perfect, inexplicable match. The genetic markers, the rare blood type, everything lined up as if they were made for each other. The statistical odds were astronomical, but there it was, in black and white. The woman he had left to bleed out in a gutter was the only person in the company's entire database, perhaps in the entire country, who could save his life. Sarah told no one. She held on to that information like a loaded gun, waiting for the right moment. And now, watching Richard Sterling waste away in that hospital bed, transformed from an all-powerful tycoon into a man, terrified of his own mortality, she knew the moment was approaching. In the following weeks, Sarah orchestrated a worldwide search for donors. She hired specialized agencies, consulted international organ banks, offered absurd sums of money. Richard's hope rose and fell with each lead that turned out to be incompatible. He clung to her like a drowning man to a raft, completely trusting her competence, her dedication. He never suspected that she was subtly sabotaging the searches, dismissing potential candidates before they reached him, delaying critical processes. The dialysis treatment was brutal. 3 times a week, Richard spent 4 hours connected to a machine that did the work his kidneys no longer could. Sarah was always present during these sessions, working silently while he alternated between restless naps and empty stares at the ceiling. It was during one of these sessions that he began to talk, really talk, for the first time. "Do you have a family, Sarah?" he asked suddenly, his voice weak but curious. She looked up from her laptop. I have my mother. She's all I have. The truth, stripped of details. And your father? Never knew him. He left before I was born. Richard nodded slowly. Mine. Too, he was there physically, but never really present. Just left me the company and the expectation of being perfect. He paused. I never married, you know. Never had kids. I always thought I had time. That after I closed one more deal, reached one more milestone, then I would live. But later never comes, does it? And now I'm here and I have no one, no relatives who can donate. No one who cares enough. Sarah felt a strange stirring in her chest. It wasn't pity, not exactly. It was recognition. Recognition that he was also alone, that his cruelty was perhaps just another way of surviving in a world that never taught him how to be human. But then she remembered Gabriel, remembered lying in the gutter, remembered his cold eyes, assessing whether she was worth the inconvenience. And the recognition evaporated. There are always people who care, Mr. Sterling. Sometimes we just don't realize it until it's too late. He looked at her with a new intensity. Do you care? Is that why you're still here, putting up with all this, because you care? Sarah chose her words carefully. I'm here because I have a job to do. And because, unlike many people, I finish what I start. 4 months passed. The year turned, bringing a new, humid January to New York, and Richard's health continued to decline despite the best treatments money could buy. He was weaker, more jaundiced, more dependent. The company began to buzz with rumors about his prolonged absence, about who would take over if the worst happened. Sarah managed these conversations skillfully, maintaining the board's confidence while silently consolidating her own power. It was on a March afternoon, after a particularly difficult dialysis session, that the doctor called Sarah for a private conversation. She saw the seriousness in his face and knew what was coming. Ms. Jennings, Dr. Evans began, we need to be realistic. We've searched every national and international registry. There are no compatible donors available, and Mr. Sterling is getting too weak to endure this routine for much longer. We're considering moving him to palliative care. How long? Sarah asked, her voice neutral. Weeks, maybe 2 months if we're lucky. Sarah thanked the doctor and left, walking through the sterile hospital corridors. She had reached the decision point. She had the power to save Richard Sterling. She had the biological compatibility, and she had the choice to do exactly what he had done to her, simply walk away and let nature take its course. But as she walked, an idea began to form, a more elaborate, crueler, and more satisfying idea than simply letting him perish. What if she offered salvation? What if she revealed herself as the compatible donor? Richard would be grateful, desperately grateful. She could ask for anything, and he would give it. She could take total control of the company, could make him her puppet, could transform him from a tycoon into a marionette. And then, at the height of that dependency, at the moment he needed her most, she would reveal who she really was and withdraw the offer. She would let him know that his life had been in the hands of the woman he tried to eliminate, and that he would lose that life just as he lost his son, through sheer callous indifference. The perfect cruelty of the idea made her smile for the first time in years. It took 3 days to set the plan in motion. Sarah manipulated the hospital records so the doctors would discover her compatibility on their own, making it seem like a fortuitous accident during a routine check of company files. When Dr. Evans called her into his office, his eyes shining with hope, she feigned perfect surprise. Is that possible? I can save his life. Technically, yes, the tests show a complete match. But it's a huge decision, Ms. Jennings. Donating a kidney is a serious surgery with risks and permanent changes to your life. Sarah took a calculated pause, letting the doctor see the internal struggle she was pretending to feel. He's my boss. I've worked for him for almost 2 years. Would it be ethical? The doctor leaned forward. Between us, he has no one else. You would literally be his only chance. But I understand the complexity of the situation. Think carefully before you decide. Sarah promised to think. But she already knew her answer. She waited a full week, a week in which she visited Richard daily and saw the desperation grow in his eyes as the doctors subtly prepared him for the inevitable. And then, on a rainy Thursday that echoed that fateful night 4 years ago, she walked into his room and said the words that would change everything. "Mr. Sterling, the doctors told me about my compatibility. I want to make the donation." The silence that followed was absolute. Richard stared at her as if she had just offered him heaven itself, his eyes filled with tears, something she had never imagined seeing. You would do that? For me?" Sarah moved closer to the bed, taking his frail hand. "Yes, but I need a few things in return." The relief on his face was replaced by caution. "Anything, name it." She pulled documents from her bag, papers she had meticulously prepared with the help of discreet lawyers. "I want full power of attorney over all company decisions while you recover. I want to be named interim CEO, and I want contractual guarantees that, no matter what happens, my job is secure and my compensation is assured." Richard didn't even hesitate. He would have signed a pact with the devil at that moment if it meant living. "Everything. You'll have everything. Just give me more time, Sarah, please." She nodded, putting away the documents he had signed with trembling hands. "The surgery is scheduled for next week." In the days leading up to the procedure, Sarah became an object of admiration throughout the company. The devoted assistant who was going to donate an organ to save the CEO. Corporate newsletters published the story. Colleagues looked at her with reverence. Richard treated her like a saint, a savior, the only person in the world who had proven truly loyal, and she accepted it all with performative humility, knowing that every word of gratitude, every look of adoration, was another layer of irony that would make the final revelation even more devastating. The night before the surgery, Richard asked to speak with her alone. His private room was quiet, only the beep of the monitors breaking the silence. He held her hand, and Sarah had to fight the urge to pull away. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. "No one has ever done anything like this for me, not even my own family." Sarah looked directly into his eyes. "Maybe because I understand what it's like to be alone when you need someone most. Maybe because I know what it's like to have your life ripped away from you without a choice. And maybe because, in the end, everyone deserves a second chance." Every word was true, but not in the way he understood. Richard squeezed her hand. "When I recover, I'm going to change. I'm going to be a better man. I'm going to make this sacrifice you're making worthwhile." Sarah smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I hope so, Mr. Sterling." But as she left the room that night, she knew he would never get the chance to change, because tomorrow, after the doctors confirmed the surgery could proceed, before the anesthesia was administered, she would tell him everything. She would reveal who she was, what he had done, how every moment of her kindness had been a calculated lie. And then she would walk away, leaving him alone with the knowledge that his salvation had been within reach and was taken away by his own past cruelty. The revenge would be complete. Richard Sterling would spend his last days knowing exactly why he was alone, why no one truly cared, and why the only person who could have saved him chose not to. He would finally understand what Sarah had felt in that gutter: absolute despair and total abandonment. The morning of the 18th May, surgery dawned grey over New York, heavy clouds promising a storm. Sarah arrived at the hospital at 6 a.m., wearing comfortable clothes as instructed, carrying a small bag with personal items. Her heart was racing, but not from fear of the surgery. It was racing from the proximity of the moment she had planned for 4 years, the revelation, the revenge, the justice. The nurses greeted her with gentle smiles, admiration in their eyes. The entire staff knew the story, the devoted assistant donating a kidney to her boss. She was being led to a prep room, putting on the hospital gown, when she asked to see Richard one last time before the procedures began. They took her to his room. Richard was already prepped, in a surgical gown, a mixed expression of hope and fear on his face. When he saw Sarah, his face lit up with a relief so genuine it almost made her waver. Almost. "You came," he said softly. "I was afraid you'd change your mind." Sarah pulled up a chair sitting beside the bed. "We need to talk before the surgery, Mr. Sterling. There's something you need to know, something I should have told you. A long time ago," his expression turned confused, a little apprehensive. "You can call me Richard. After everything you're doing for me, I think we can dispense with the formalities." Sarah took a deep breath. This was it. The moment she had rehearsed 1,000 times in her mind. "Richard, do you remember a night 4 years ago? It was March, raining hard. You were coming back from an important meeting. Late, impatient." He frowned. 4 years is a long time, Sarah. "Why?" "You were driving down Park Avenue, a silver imported sedan. You had just left a business dinner." The color began to drain from Richard's face. "How do you know that?" "Because I was there," Sarah continued, her voice starting to tremble slightly, not with fear, but with years of repressed pain. "I was crossing at the crosswalk. I was 7 months pregnant. You were looking at your phone and you didn't see me. Or you did, but you couldn't stop in time." "No," Richard whispered, his eyes wide, the memory clearly flooding back like a tsunami. "No, it was an accident. I didn't—" "You stopped the car," Sarah interrupted him. "You got out to check the damage to your bumper. I was lying in the gutter, bleeding, my hand outstretched, begging for help, begging for my baby. And you looked at me, calculated the risks, and you left. You just got in your car and sped away, leaving me there to die." Richard's hands began to shake violently. The heart monitor sped up, beeping loudly. I didn't know you were pregnant. I didn't see clearly. It was dark, raining." "You saw," Sarah said, tears finally streaming down her face. "You saw and you didn't care. My son Gabriel, he didn't survive the trauma, and the internal injuries were so severe that I can never have another child. You took everything from me that night, Richard. Everything." The silence that followed was broken only by the frantic beeps of the monitors. Richard was in shock, his face as white as the sheets, tears beginning to fall. Oh my God, I was a monster. I am a monster." Sarah stood up, pulling the compatibility documents from her bag. "For 4 years, I planned this. I found you, infiltrated your life, made myself indispensable. And when I found out I was the only person who could save your life, the irony was so perfect I knew it was fate. You were going to die knowing that the woman you left to bleed out was your only salvation, and that she chose to do to you exactly what you did to me. Walk away." Richard was sobbing openly now, a broken, pathetic sound. "Please, Sarah, please, I'm so sorry. I am so sorry. I was different then. I was cruel. I was selfish. But I've changed. I'm changing." "Changed?" Sarah laughed bitterly. "You're just scared now because you're on the other side. How many lives have you destroyed in these 4 years, Richard? How many families have you evicted? How many people have you fired without a second thought? You haven't changed. You're just weak." She turned toward the door, her hand on the knob. "The nurse should be waiting for me. I'm going to tell the doctors I've changed my mind, that I'm not donating the kidney after all, and you're going to spend your last days knowing exactly why you're alone. You'll understand what real despair is, what real abandonment is. You'll feel what I felt." Sarah opened the door, but before she could leave, she heard a sound that made her stop. Not a scream, not a plea. It was a deep, visceral sob, the sound of a completely broken man. She looked back and saw Richard hiding his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. "You're right," he said between sobs. "You're completely right. I don't deserve your mercy. I don't deserve to live. What I did was unforgivable. But Sarah, please, before you go, let me say one thing, just one." She waited, her hand still on the doorknob. Richard lifted his face, ravaged by tears. "I remember that night every single day since it happened. I wake up thinking about it, I go to sleep thinking about it. I convinced myself it was just an accident, that it wasn't that serious, because if I admitted the truth, I'd have to admit I'm a monster. But I am, and your revenge is just more than just." Sarah felt something strange happening inside her. The satisfaction she had expected to feel wasn't coming. In its place, there was only a vast, tired emptiness. When my mother was alive, Richard continued, his voice trembling, she used to say that the only thing that matters in the end is if we were able to love and be loved. I failed at that miserably. I built an empire of money and power, but I died inside a long time ago, long before my kidneys failed. And you know why? Because I never learned to see people as people. I only saw obstacles or tools, including you that night, including everyone who worked for me. I was so focused on getting to the top that I forgot there was life all around me. He coughed, wiping away tears. You gave me something these last few months, Sarah. Even if it was fake, even if it was part of your plan, for the first time in decades, someone treated me like a human being. Someone talked to me about things other than business. Someone held my hand when I was scared, and I'll carry that with me, even if it's only for a few more weeks. Sarah felt her own tears return. No, she whispered. You don't understand. Nothing I did was real. I hate you. I hate everything you represent. I know, Richard replied softly, and you have every right, but still those moments meant something to me. And if I could go back in time, if I could have a second chance on that night, I would have stopped the car. I would have gotten out. I would have called an ambulance. I would have done everything differently. But I can't, and that's something I'll carry to my last breath. Sarah stood there, frozen, caught between years of rage and something she couldn't name. A nurse appeared at the door. Ms. Jennings, it's time. We need to prep you. This is it, Sarah thought. Now or never. Walk away. Leave. Him here. Do to him what he did to you. But when she opened her mouth, the words that came out were not the ones she had planned. Can you give me 5 minutes? She said to the nurse, who nodded and discreetly withdrew. Sarah went back into the room, closing the door. She sat down heavily in the chair beside Richard's bed. He looked at her with red-rimmed eyes, awaiting the final verdict. When I lost Gabriel, Sarah began slowly, I thought I had lost everything. My ability to be a mother, my faith in people, my will to live. I spent years feeding on anger, using it as fuel. And it worked. It got me here, gave me the strength to do things I never imagined I was capable of. But now, looking at you, seeing you as broken as I was in that gutter, I realize something. What? Richard whispered. That revenge won't bring my son back. It won't heal my scars. It won't make the last 4 years of pain disappear. She paused, wiping her tears. If I leave you here, if I walk away, I become the same thing you were that night. Someone who can help, but chooses not to. Someone who values their own satisfaction over a human life. Sarah, you don't owe me anything, Richard said. Absolutely nothing. I know, but I owe it to myself. I owe it to the person I was before that night, the woman who believed in kindness even when the world was cruel. She died in the gutter with Gabriel, but maybe it's time to let her live again. Richard stared at her, barely daring to breathe. What are you saying? I'm saying, Sarah took a deep breath, fighting against years of hatred that screamed inside her, that I'm going to go through with the donation, not because you deserve it, not because I completely forgive you, but because I deserve to be free of this, free of the anger that has been consuming me, free of the person I've become. She stood up, walking to the window. Outside, the rain was beginning to fall, thick drops against the glass. But you're going to do something for me in return, not to pay me back. This is priceless, but as part of what you promised, to be different. Anything, Richard said, his voice thick with emotion. Sarah turned to face him. You're going to use all this wealth, all this power to do what you should have been doing for years. You're going to create a foundation for at-risk single mothers. You're going to renovate public maternity wards. You're going to ensure that no woman goes through what I went through without access to proper care. You're going to turn your empire of greed into something that actually helps people, and you're going to do it in the name of Gabriel, the boy who never got a chance to live because you were too busy looking at your phone. Tears streamed freely down Richard's face. I promise, on everything I am, on everything I have, I promise, the name Gabriel Jennings will mean something in this country. It will mean hope for thousands of mothers and babies. Sarah nodded, feeling an immense weight begin to lift from her shoulders. "And one last thing. After you recover, after I recover, I don't want to see you again. I'm resigning from the company. You will respect that. I'm going to rebuild my life far away from all of this, far away from you, because forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. And being near you will always remind me of the worst night of my life." Richard nodded, understanding and sadness in his eyes. "You'll have all the financial support you need, a fair settlement, not as a bribe, but as acknowledgement of what I took from you." "I don't want your money," Sarah said firmly. "I just want to move on. I want peace. I want to wake up one day and not feel this weight on my chest." The nurse knocked on the door again, more insistent. "We really need to begin the preparations." Sarah looked at Richard one last time. "I'll see you on the other side of the surgery, and then we each go our own way." Richard held out his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Sarah took it briefly. "Thank you," he whispered. "Not for saving my life, but for showing me that there's still humanity in this world, even after everything I've done to destroy it." Sarah didn't reply. She simply let go of his hand and walked out of the room, following the nurse down the white corridors to the prep room. As she walked, she felt something strange and liberating. The anger was still there. The pain was still there, but they no longer controlled her every thought, her every decision. For the first time in 4 years, she was making a choice dictated not by revenge, but by the person she wanted to become. The surgery lasted 7 hours. It was technically perfect, with no complications. Sarah woke up in recovery and pain, but it was a physical, tangible pain that was almost welcome compared to the emotional agony she had carried for so long. Richard, in another room, woke up with a functioning kidney, with more time to live, with a second chance he never imagined he deserved. They saw each other only once after the surgery, a week later as they were both being discharged. It was a brief, formal encounter, with doctors and nurses around. Richard tried to thank her, but Sarah just nodded. There was nothing left to say. 3 months later, Sarah was in a small apartment in the Berkshires, far from the chaos of New York City. She had resigned from Sterling Enterprises as planned, accepting only a modest severance despite Richard's generous offers. She spent her days reading, hiking in the mountains, and rediscovering who she was when she wasn't consumed by vengeance. One afternoon, while sipping tea on her balcony and watching the fog roll over the pine trees, her phone rang. It was an unknown number. Hesitantly, she answered. "Hello, Sarah." It was the voice of Teresa, the former HR director at Sterling Enterprises. "Sorry to bother you. I know you asked for no more contact, but I thought you'd want to know. The inauguration was today." "What inauguration?" Sarah asked, confused. "The Gabriel Jennings Maternity Hospital. It's the first in a network Richard is building. State-of-the-art facilities, free care for low-income mothers, specialized medical staff. He made sure the first one was in the very neighborhood where you grew up in Queens. There's even a plaque with Gabriel's story about how a lost life can still create hope for others." Sarah felt tears well up, but they were different from the tears of rage she had cried for 4 years. He actually did it. He did, and there's more. He sold his mansion, his luxury car, most of his personal assets. He's living simply and dedicating almost his entire fortune to the social projects. They say he's completely changed, that he's not the same man. Sarah thanked her for the call and hung up. She sat there for a long time, processing the information. Richard Sterling was keeping his promise. He was transforming a legacy of cruelty into something of value. Gabriel, her little Gabriel who had never taken a breath, was in a way saving lives through the forced transformation of the man who had inadvertently caused his loss. And Sarah realized something profound. True revenge wasn't making Richard suffer. It was transforming him into someone who would carry the weight of what he'd done and choose to do differently. It was ensuring that that terrible night had meaning, that it wasn't just an empty tragedy, but a catalyst for real change. She would never completely forgive him. The scars, physical and emotional, would always be there. But for the first time since waking up in that hospital bed 4 years ago, Sarah Jennings felt like she could breathe. She could look to the future without it being entirely defined by the past. She picked up a pen and paper, something she did more and more often in those quiet mountain days, and began to write. Not about revenge, not about anger, but about rebuilding, about how a broken woman learned to piece herself back together differently, creating a mosaic that was stronger precisely because it acknowledged the cracks. Months turned into years. Sarah never saw Richard Sterling in person again, but she followed from a distance the changes he implemented. Hospitals built, families helped, lives saved. The name Gabriel Jennings became synonymous with hope for vulnerable mothers across the country. And in every life touched by these projects, Sarah saw a piece of the sun she never had, living on in a way she could never have imagined. She eventually went back to work, but not in the corporate world. She became a volunteer for support groups for women who had experienced pregnancy loss or medical trauma. Her story, when she shared parts of it, inspired others to find strength in vulnerability, to turn pain into purpose. And on a rainy night, exactly 7 years after that fateful hit and run, Sarah was at home when she received a letter. It had no return address, just her P.O. box. Inside, a single sheet of paper with shaky handwriting. Sarah. Today marks 7 years since that night. 7 years of living, with the weight of what I did. 7 years of trying to honor the promise I made to you and to Gabriel. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness, as I know that is not something I can ever deserve. I'm writing only to say that the kidney you gave me didn't just save my physical life. It saved something I thought had been dead for decades. My humanity. Yesterday, we opened the 10th maternity hospital. Tomorrow we start construction on 3 new support centers. Next year, the aid fund will reach 20 states, and every time I see a mother holding her newborn baby in one of those places, I think of Gabriel, of what he could have been, and I promise to make every extra day I was given count. You taught me that mercy is not weakness, that forgiveness does not mean forgetting, and that the hardest choices are the ones that truly define us. I hope you have found peace. You deserve it more than anyone. With eternal gratitude. Richard. Sarah folded the letter slowly. Outside, the rain was falling softly, washing the world, making it new. She wouldn't answer the letter. She didn't need to. They had both said everything that needed to be said in that hospital room years ago. But that night, for the first time since she lost Gabriel, Sarah dreamed of him. Not as a painful loss, but as a gentle possibility. She dreamed of a boy with bright eyes who was smiling, not at her but at all the children who were alive because a tragedy had been transformed into change. And when she woke up, the tears on her face were of a soft sadness, mixed with something it had taken her years to recognize. Hope. Fate had closed. A circle in a way no human plan could have ever predicted. From the greatest cruelty, what was born was not empty vengeance, but real transformation. And maybe, just maybe, that was true justice. Not punishment that destroys, but consequence that rebuilds. Sarah got up, opened the window, and breathed in the fresh morning air after the rain. 7 years. A 7-year journey from pain to purpose, from victim to survivor, from revenge to liberation. And finally, she was free.